Yep. Good evening, everyone. So yesterday we learned about working with class component in React, how to deal with the class components. So React class components related some basics we learned. So what we discussed about class component is the concept of class component means how to define a component, define component, extend. One is pure component, another one is component. We discuss a difference between pure component and subcomponent. What is difference? Remember? No? So a component usually updates, mounts everything, remounts whenever any change occurred. Only changes need to be updated, then you can do your components, right? And one more thing we learned is how to render method and how to define a state in class component. How to define the state in class component. So you don't need any hooks. You cannot use hooks. Then how to configure state and how to use the state we learned. Now what is another thing? We learned data binding, event binding, style binding, class binding. These all are same in class component. Only the change is how you mention a state. It is called stateful. It is stateful because implicitly state is defined. We have to just use it. Right. Next now, after understanding this, now what we are going to learn another concept is, so once we know this event binding also I told you basics. Event binding same, only the point is here events will point towards, events are going to point towards methods, no functions here. They will point towards the methods. Here some problems are there. We will try to understand the concept. So up to this we discussed already how it works actual. Now, yeah. So we learned how style binding, class binding, everything works. This is the process of configuring the state, accessing the state. Now let's see what is the concept about event binding. We are starting the project and we will see what is the concept of event binding. So let's keep one button. Okay. I will clean up all these other concepts. Okay, constructor is required. This is just general. This is our traditional class component. Yesterday we learned even mount face, how to write the mount face by using component, did mount, will mount like concept will be there. Okay. Now here what we need to do is we need to create a button. So this is a button and button is having some text like insert. Okay. And on insert we want to display some message below. We will configure a state. So this dot state is an object. In that we have a message, MSG, message is empty. How to configure state we learned already. So yesterday we discussed about configuring the state. Okay. After configuring the state here, what we need is we need to write a functionality on button click. So button click functionality means we have to write a method. So how do you configure handle? Insert click is a method. Okay. Now in this we need some action to perform. Action is, suppose action is a DOM method. DOM manipulation. DOM manipulation means console, alert, prompt, confirm, like that. So then there is no problem. Alert. So I say record inserted. That is the message we are giving. And here on button click, I need to execute that. That means what we have to do, click, we have to access this dot handle insert click, because it is a class members are accessed by using this. By using this we are accessing. Okay, now let's see here. When I click on insert, then it is going to show that alert, everything is working fine. But now you have a problem. The problem is, if insert click, I am trying to set the state. How to set the state? So this dot set state, and into that state is an object. In that we have a property called MSG. What is the message we want to display? Actually message is empty. We want the message as record inserted. That is the message we want to show. Okay, where do you want to show this message? I want to show the message inside this paragraph. Now what we have to do, this dot state dot MSG, it is going to get the message and show, right? So what is our logic? When user clicks insert button, it has to set a state. Now you can see when I click on this insert button, it throws an error. And the error is saying that cannot read the properties of undefined. Cannot read the properties of undefined. That means set state have some issues. That means it is unable to set the state. Remember, if I am not setting the state, here I am using just a method like alert, or I am using like console, like alert, like console, anything I am using, suppose inserted. Now you don't have a problem. That means you can see when I click on insert, there is no problem. But when I am trying to set the state, then we have a problem. When I am trying to set the state, then you can see now we have a problem. So what is the problem in setting a state? The way of setting the state is correct. There is no problem in this. How to set a state is same, by using set state. Then why it is unable to do this? What is the issue here is, observe carefully. When state is created, we learned that state is created. State is created while creating component. Am I right? While creating an component object, the state is created. In constructor we are writing now. In constructor we are writing means at the time of creating an object, it is designed. Okay. That means at the time of creating an object for the component, state is created. That's good. Okay. Now, when this, that means memory is allocated at the time of creating component, and when this is happening, after component is created, the memory is allocated for the function, and the function is working. At the time of creating component, state is created, and at the time of click, the function memory is allocated. Actually, it is a method. Method memory is allocated and it is using. Now, what is problem is actually the state which is created before the click of button is not accessible to button. That means the new method that you created, this method is unable to use the state. Why it is unable to use the state? Because it is unable to use the state because I will tell you one example, means more clear example. Suppose you installed a software in your PC, you installed some software. After installing the software is not ready to use. It will ask you to restart. Now the question is, why a software is not ready to use immediately after installing? Why it needs a restart? That is a general experience for you. You install some software and that software is not ready to use. It will say, please restart. Suppose you install printer drivers, you install some drivers, it will say, please restart, then you can use. Why a software is not ready to use immediately after install? Why it needs a restart? And after restarting, how it becomes ready? Understood the question, right? Now, the answer is actually your operating system will have a memory. Actually, we call registry. Your operating system have a registry. In this registry, some apps files are stored. App related files are registered here. The files that are registered related to apps in the registry, those apps only OS can use. That means operating system can use only the apps which are in the registry. Understood? That means every operating system maintains a registry. In that registry, which app related files are present, only those apps it can operate. Others, it cannot operate. Now, what you have done, you already loaded operating system is loaded. That means you already loaded operating system. After loading operating system, what you done? You installed some files. That means you installed some software, some files are added. Files related to app. Now what is problem is, into a registry, these files cannot be copied. Into registry, they cannot be copied. Into registry, it cannot copy those files because registry will not allow anything after OS is loaded. Before OS is loaded, they need to be registered. That means before OS is loaded, these need to be registered. That means what is happening here? These files installed, but they are not ready to use because they are not penetrating to the registry. They are not going into the registry. Then what they will ask? They will ask you to restart. When you restart, what happens at the time of restarting? What will happen? These new files are copied into registry because registry allowed to copy files only at the time of loading operating system, not after loading operating system. At the time of loading operating system, registry allows new files. That is the reason after loading, the files are not allowed into registry and your app will not work. Now, when you restart, what will happen? The new files that you have installed, they will be copied into the registry and now operating system successfully loads and it can use the new. Understood the point? Concept understood? Huh? Everyone understood the concept? That means why an app is not ready to use immediately after installing? Because it needs to copy into registry. And when registry allows at the time of loading, restarting, right? At the time of loading, the registry allows new files. This is the technique here happening. At the time of creating component, state is created. After component is created, component is mounted. After mounted, one more method is generated. What is that method? Handle, insert, click. Now this method cannot use the memory which is created at the time of creating. Understood? That means this method cannot use this memory. Why it cannot use that memory? Because this memory is at the time of creating. And this memory is after creating, after loaded, this memory is designed. That means now what is the concept here? The concept is insert click is created after the memory for state is created. That means this insert click is unable to use the state. Why? Because constructor is loading only once. Constructor will be called only once. An object it will call only once. At the time of calling the constructor, state is created. After creating the state, you have some methods. Those methods cannot use the state. Understood? That means these methods cannot use the state. That is the reason when you are trying to use the state, then state is telling that I don't know who are you. That means the class is telling that, so I don't know who are you. That is the reason it is saying that undefined. Undefined means I don't recognize you. Undefined means it is not there. That means for state, this function is not there. For a method, this function is not there. This method is not there. That means at the time of constructing, it doesn't find this. Am I right? At the time of constructing, it is unable to find. Then after construction is completed, it cannot allow it to use by this. It is not allowing. Then what to do? Then what to do is, what we have to do here is, at the time of constructing itself, we have to tell the constructor that there is a function called insert click, please bind with you, so that this insert click can use the state. That means at the time of creating the state, that means inside the constructor, what we have to do now, we have to register this method. Understood? That means this method is not registered while creating. While creating, it is not registered. I told you about registry. Registry is at the time of loading, means at the time of creating, it registers the methods. And at the time of creating component, it is unable to register the method. If it is not registering the method, it cannot use the method. Especially for whom it cannot use the method? For the state. For other operations, it can do. Other than state, you are doing any other operation, it can do, because state is in the constructor. If it has to share the state present in that constructor, it should be registered along with the state. That means what we have to do now here, we have to access that method. What is the method? This dot handle insert click is equal to, we have to access this dot handle insert click. It have a method called bind. We have a method called bind. Bind with whom? Bind with the current class memory. This indicates current class memory. That means now what it is doing is, it is calling handle insert click and it is binding handle insert click with the current constructor. Understood? If and that is accessible and assigning to whom? Assigning to insert click. That means what does it means? Now this insert click can use this state. That insert click can use that state. Otherwise, it cannot use the state. It cannot use the state. That means now at the time of creating the state, it will register your method and it will bind the method to the current memory, current class memory. When it binds with current class memory, it can use the current class memory. And in the current class memory, there is a state. Now it can use that state. Otherwise, it is not possible. That means now see now what is happening here. When I click insert, it says inserted. Now it is fine. If you miss this part, if you miss this part, if you miss this part, then you have an error. You have an error. Why you have an error? Because the state is created first. After that, the methods are created. And the state which is created before the methods are created, it will not allow the methods to use the state. It will not allow the methods to use the state. So you have to make sure that all methods that are going to use state, they are registered at the time of creating component. At the time of creating component. If not, then it cannot use them. And remember, this is only when your methods are trying to use state, because state belongs to constructor. It belongs to the construction phase. Others doesn't belong to construction phase. Alert, confirm, anything you do, any other operation, instead of state, you are doing any other operation, you can do. If state related any operation you are doing, make sure that you have to bind. And remember, you may ask like, sir, I have 20 methods and 20 events on change, on drop down change, on text box change. If they have 20 events, all the 20 events I need to register? Yes. Yes, you have to register all those 20 events. You have to bind them. You have to bind them to the constructor. Means you have to bind them to the current class memory in the constructor. If you return 20 events, all the 20 events must be binded. That is the reason in modern scripts, we don't recommend these classes much, because these type of issues we are facing earlier. Now in the modern React, they have a solution, is better not to go with them. But still companies are using. And if they are using, already I showed you, it is not recommended, but still you are using, then you have so many this kind of issues. Right? There are so many techniques, I will tell you, different ways how we can do. So what is the main problem you found here? The main concept is in event binding. So here, binding methods to use state. Binding methods to use state. How you can bind the methods to use state. So this is the first important. So state is configured at the time of creating component. Methods are generated after mounting the component. Hence, state cannot recognize or state cannot register. State cannot register the methods defined in components. Hence, state cannot register the methods defined in components. It will not allow the methods to use state. It will not allow the methods to use state. It will not allow the methods to use state. It will not allow methods to use state. You have to bind the methods to current class memory while creating component object so that we can use the state created at that use the state configured at the time of creating component. That is the point. You have to bind the methods to current class memory while creating component object so that they can use the state configured at the time of creating component. If you don't bind the methods while creating component, it cannot use the state which is created while creating component. That is the important concept. So you have to bind the methods. So how do you do this? So syntactically, what you have to do, we have a constructor. In the just syntax I will give first. We have this dot handle click is equal to this dot handle click dot bind with this. That means what we are doing first, loading the bind method. Bind method we are binding to current class and we are assigning to the reference. What is that reference? Handle click. Now what is this handle click? We have a handle click method. This handle click method can be used. That means you have a button on click is equal to this dot handle click. That's how we need to define. Now if you ask like, do I need to register every event method like this? If it is using state, yeah, then yes, you have to do that. If it is using the state, you have to do this. So if it is not using state, no need to do that. If it is using state, you have to define that. On change, on click, on blur, on focus, anything, every event which is using state, you need to do. That means there are 4 text boxes, all are having on change, they set some state, every event must be registered in the constructor, right? So this is the first basic example. So I will copy this example. Sorry, here we need to register. What is it? This dot handle insert click, this dot handle insert click dot bind with this. That's the option. And now it is working fine. It is going to handle that and display, right? This is working fine. I will copy this example. This is an example for that. Okay. Now in see, this is outdated concept, but still for experienced people, they ask some questions related to this. Why? Because if you are showing some experience, that means they think that you might have idea with old version also, right? Old and new versions you might have. But not only that, some companies what they need, they need developers for upgrade projects. Upgrading projects contract they will take for 2 3 months. And what is their job? Migrating from old version to new. In that case, they need people who have good knowledge of old as well as new. So in such cases, what you generally do is, so we ask questions like, then how you manage this, that in old versions. Those questions will be there. Now, another point is, the question is, without bind, can we manage this? That means without bind. That means, is it necessary to bind in the constructor? Without that, is there any another way? So for example, I am writing another button. This button is another method is there. So handle delete click. Okay. And this dot set state, we need a MSG. So record deleted successfully. This message should come. And obviously, I am not binding that. Here we have delete and on click. On click is what? This dot handle delete click. We are using this. Now, what is the point is, I click on insert, it's working fine, but delete is not working because delete is not registered, right? Every method need to be registered. Every method need to be registered. If it is using a state, it must be registered. Now, without registering in the constructor, you have another technique. Another technique is, directly here I can use the bind method. So directly we can use the bind method. Right. So directly we can use a bind method here. I'm directly using a bind method. That means, you see, I'm just using the bind method directly without defining in the constructor. Now delete, it is still having a problem. Why? Because bind with home, bind with what? This means current class memory, right? We are having the current class memory. Current class memory, that means it is working fine, right? It is using fine. This is. So it is able to access and use that. And 1 second. Yep. Okay. I think some issue is there here itself, right? Okay. Now, what we are doing here is, this time we are not defining inside the constructor, where we are defining directly by this. Now, how this is possible? Now, what is happening here? So that means how this is possible. That means previously what we done in the constructor, we need to bind. In the constructor, we need to bind. At the time of constructing itself, it can handle. Now what we are doing, not in the constructor, directly you are using a bind technique here. You are using a bind technique, but still it is able to use the state. It is able to use the state. What is this mechanism is, actually both are working. But what is this doing and what is this option is doing, right? Actually, it is registered in the constructor. It is registered in the constructor. That means it is registered in the constructor. It is registered in the constructor. When it is registered in the constructor, what happens when it is registered in the constructor? It is registered in the constructor at the time of creating. At the time of creating itself, it is registered in the constructor. So you are registering the methods even if you don't know that you will use or not. That means you are registering all the methods. And are you sure you are using all those? We are not sure we are using all those. Then we have another technique. After creating also, bind method have a technique of penetrating into the memory of current class and accessing the state of current class. After mounting, also React have the ability to penetrate into the constructor and it can access the state predefined at the time of creating the component. And that is possible by using which method? Bind. Then the question is, then why you don't do this every time? Why we don't do this every time? Because we have two concepts. You know, in programming, we have lazy loading, eager loading. What is lazy loading? Lazy loading means it will load only when it is required. Eager loading means it will load and keep ready. You can use whenever you want. That means you are sure that these operations are performed, then better implement a eager load. You will not sure that whether they perform these operations or not, but later they may perform, then better use an lazy load. That means actually many times what we do, we are sure that these events will work, but sometimes we are not sure whether they will use these events or not. Then we use both techniques. For the events, when we are sure that they are used compulsory, then we configure at the time of constructor. If we are not sure whether they will use them or not, depending on situation, then we define by using this technique. This is called lazy, and the previous technique is called eager. So we have two important concepts now. So what is that? So registering and binding an method while creating component refers to eager loading. It usually refers to the eager loading mechanism. It refers to eager loading. So you can implement lazy loading. You can implement lazy loading. You can implement lazy loading. And what is the concept about lazy loading? What is the concept about lazy loading? By using bind method. By using bind method at the event handler. By using bind method at the event handler. We know event handlers. That means what is another technique now? Syntactically, what you can do, we can have a button and on click, we are defining this dot handle click dot what? Bind with what? This. We can configure in this way. We can bind with this. So registering a method, a bind method while creating the component. So you can use both techniques. It depends on the requirement. Now another concept is Finally, I will give another example also. Another concept is without bind method also we can do. That means without using the bind method also we can make uh, the event to use the current class memory without bind method. But remember, these two techniques are abnormal in behavior. Abnormal in behavior means according to situation requirement they will be working. But you want fixed functionality every time, then you better configure in the constructor. Every time you will see majority projects, you will see people using in the constructor itself, they register everything. These are also okay, but these are according to the situation requirements we implement. These are not regularly used. Without bind method also you can do. How you can do without bind method? For example, I have another button. This is update. So we are having one more method to define. So handle update click. We are using update click. Handle update click. This set state and MSG. It should define record updated. That is the message we want to display. And update button have to use it. Usually what we do, we write what and click. Click this dot. What is it? It is going to perform. So handle update click. Update click. Obviously this is not going to work. Insert is working fine. Delete is working fine. But update is not. Because it needs to bind with the current class memory. But without bind method, how you can handle this? Without bind method, how you can handle this? Without bind method, how you can handle? I am writing an event. This event is, I'm writing a function. What this function is returning? This dot handle update click. It is returning this dot handle update click. Still it is not done. So it is handle update click. It is a function. That means you see now what we are doing update, it will show that update. Now there is no bind. There is no bind. So interiors have different points like, so what are various techniques? Without bind can I use? Is it necessary to use the bind? Now without bind, how it is working? What does this means? How it can use the memory of current class without bind? How it can use the memory of current class without bind? Bind is required to use the memory of current class. Through bind method only, we can use the memory of current class so that we can use the state. Without bind method, how you can use the memory of current class? How you can use the memory of current class without the bind method? That generally, you know, if you know the concept of functions, function returns, function return. If you know about function return, you know the concept of this. Usually, I think I told you about that, but generally see, I will give you one concept. Because in JavaScript, you already learned here. Suppose in JavaScript, what is the concept is, we have a function. We have a function. So function is some hello, or function is like some addition. We have a function. Now this function is defined to return some 10 number. Right? Now the question is, what is the meaning of return? In a function, what is the meaning of return? What is the meaning of return in a function? And why you need a function with a return? Why you need a function with return? For generally, do you know what is answer for this? People do. They say that it returns a value. Return is a jump statement. Am I right? Return is a jump statement. How a jump statement returns value? How a jump statement returns value? That means the point is what is void means and what is return means. That means usually functions are void and functions have a return. What is void means? In general, what people think void means it will not return a value. That's not correct. So then actual point I will tell you what is void, what is return. Why we need a function with a return. That is important to understand here. See, actually what is the concept here is we are having, so where suppose x, okay, here we are having x equal to 10, where y equal to 20, so where z is equal to x plus y, and I am having a function, so result, and this function have to print it, document dot write, so addition is equal to whatever the result of z is there, and I am calling that result. Here. Now what generally what you do is here we will say that this z that you declared as a variable, it is not accessible outside the function. Am I right? It's not accessible now, right? Why? Why it is not accessible outside the function? What is the reason for that? Why it is not accessible outside the function? Because I will tell you the reason. What happens here is a function allocates memory. That means here what will happen is a memory is allocated for function. That means this is the memory allocated for a function. When memory is allocated for function, in that memory all these operations will happen. All those operations will happen. After the operations happen, now when it reaches here, then the memory allocated for that function, this memory is destroyed, deleted, gone. That means the memory allocated for function will be immediately destroyed when the function ends. When the function ends, that means when the function ends, the memory is destroyed. Then how you can access this here? Understood? That means you cannot access that because there is no memory at all. That means that z is deleted. That is what generally people say scope. Scope means you may think like restriction, right? Restriction means it is accessible only inside. Restriction. Do you know if I access z in result, what message it will show? It will show a message that z is not defined. Understood? It will not say that z is not accessible. If your concept is it is restricting, then it should say z is not accessible. Why it is saying z is not defined? Understood the point? That means what generally people think that function restricts the z value so that we can't access outside. That is not restriction. It's deleted. It's not there. That is the reason when you run this, what is the point happens here? I will inspect. When I inspect and I will go to the console. In the console, what is the message? The message is nothing but it is saying z is not defined. How z is not defined? It is defined. But it is saying that the z is not defined at result. At result, z is not defined. Actually, if z is present and the memory is still available, it should make it available to this result. It is not defined. It is not saying that restricted. It is not saying that it is restricted. It is saying that it's not there. Why it is not there? Why it is not there? Because once the memory allocated, once it reaches here, the memory is destroyed. Understood? Memory is destroyed. When memory is destroyed, that means that is the reason this is called as void. Void means it is not returning the memory anymore. That means what is the meaning of word void? Void is a general English term. Void is a general English term. It's not a technical term. It's an English word. That means I am talking to some person and he is in a void state. Void state means he is not responding. Nothing returning coming from him. I am talking to him and he is in void state. Void state means he is not responding, not nothing. I don't know anything from him because it is not returning anything. So what is happening? What does void means? Void means it is not returning anything related to this function. It is not returning anything related to that function. Once the function ends, gone. It is not returning anything. Is there any trace about this function? There is no trace about the function. That is the reason the functions are void. There is no trace about the function. That is the reason the function is void. Now, do you know what happens? I am using the word return. I am using the word return and z. Return z. That means, do you know what happens now? That means now see, memory allocated here. Am I right? Memory is allocated. In that memory, all this happened. X equal to 10, Y equal to 20, Z equal to 10 plus 20. What is the result? 30. The result is 30. After that, it comes to return. What is return? Return is a jump statement. Am I right? Return is a jump statement now. Break, return, continue. These are all what? Jump statement. That means what it is doing, it is jumping out of this function. And without reaching the end, it is jumping out of that function. That means the function is terminated before it ends. Then what happens, do you know? The memory allocated that function is still available. Understood? Huh? That means the memory allocated for the function still available because it is not reaching end. Anything after return statement is not reachable. No? It is not reaching the end. Before reaching the end, you are stopping it. Then that means what is happening now? The memory allocated for function will end when it reaches here. But you are terminating before it reaches here. That means what is happening? The memory is still alive. The memory for function is still alive. That means now what happens? This result, whatever you given, this will be stored in that memory. That result will be stored in that memory. That means now the function is working in two ways. It is performing the functionality and storing the result. What is void means? It will not return any memory. What does return means? That means it will stop and make the memory alive. Keep the memory alive. If you keep the memory alive, the result of this will be stored in this memory. That means now addition is a memory. In that addition memory, that result is present. That means now what I can do? I can access that addition memory here. Am I right? If I access that addition memory here, it is going to print that result. It is going to print that result and show me. Right? That means what is the meaning of return? Not returning value. Return is not returning values. Void means it doesn't mean that it doesn't return value. Then interviewer will ask you, that means you are saying use return keyword without returning a value. Are you sure? Can I use return keyword in a void function? Yes, we can. We can use. So for example, you have a function. We have a function like suppose print, and this function is having document.write statement 1. We will put a break. Okay. and we are having some statement 2, 3, 4, 5 like this. That means statement 2, statement 3, statement 4, statement 5. Now what I am doing here, I am using a return and I am not returning any value. This is which function? Void. Void function is having a return statement. And what is the purpose of return statement? If I access the print, what it is going to do? It is going to print up to statement 1, 2, 3 and stop. Is return statement used for returning values? No. That means you have a wrong definition in your brains. About return, you have a wrong idea. Return is not returning values. It is a jump statement. How it will return a value? It is a jump statement. It is not returning value. What it is doing, it is keeping the memory alive even when the function ends. Actually, function doesn't end. Function terminates and the memory is still alive. If you don't use return, function memory ends. If you use return before the memory ends, you are terminating. That means memory is still alive. So that in that memory, you can store the data and you can access it. So without this, what we can do, we can declare a global variable. We can store the result in a global variable and we can access and use in another function. But now it becomes two memories. One memory for function, another memory for the global variable. You can use the same function memory if you want its data to use across requests. You can use the same function memory if you want to use across requests. You don't need a separate memory. The memory that you allocated for function, we can continue. If you don't want to continue, make it as void. If you want to continue, then use a return. That means a simple, straightforward concept. If you want to continue the memory, then use return. If you want to terminate the memory, then make it void. That's only the point. That is what happening. See, this is all general JavaScript concept. Why I need to explain? Because if you don't have an awareness of this, now I think you got idea about this. What it is doing, it is returning. Understood? Return. Return means what? Return means what? It is keeping the memory alive. It is keeping the memory alive. That means what it is going to do, this is not going to end the memory. It is going to use the memory of current class without ending the memory. Usually what previously happens is nothing but the memory starts and memory ends. When the memory starts and memory ends, this memory cannot use this state. If you don't allow to end, then what is the advantage of that? This is actually through return technique we can do. That means what you are saying, finish the function, but the function related memory is still available. Because this is returns, arrow means it is written. It is returning this memory. And if it is returning the memory, that memory can be used by current class. So without bind method, we can make a function to use the memory of current class. How you can do that? If you don't end the memory, it can use the memory of current class. And how it is possible? By using return. That is the architecture behind all this concepts. That means it looks simple, but you will not see this much of any explanation anywhere in any website in the world. On any YouTube or anywhere you will not see this. Why? Because people think that if they explain all this to you, you will run away. You will not understand anything much. But these days you are capable of understanding this level of concept. That's the reason earlier people don't tell all this, because if they go internally and post-mortem the concept, then the learner will run away from technology. He will think that too much he is telling about this concept. This is not all required. For learner, this is not required. Simply tell him return means it returns a value. Go home, sleep and use this now. Right? Why to tell all these things to him? His brain will cook. Right? And he many times people have a mindset like this much I don't need to understand. Right? For such people, such mindsets, what trainer will do? Returns a value enough. That is enough for you. If for your level, that is enough. Return means return a value. But when you go to interview, entire 1 2 hours interview can happen only on this written word. That means we can conduct 1 2 hours interview just on written word, just only on written word in various ways, right? That much in depth about the concept architecture level will be there. So these days, what generally you may think like return means it returns some value. Then why we use return in a void function also? That means a void function also can use return. So, and why you need this return to understand is because here it is returning the memory so that it can still use the memory, right? So what is the concept here? Another technique is there. What is another technique? So another question is, can we use class memory without bind method? That is another concept. Can we use class memory without bind method? The answer is yes. If you can keep the method memory alive after the execution, then it can make use of class memory. Then it can make use of class memory. That is one nature again. So you can keep the method memory after the execution. This is an syntax like this. That means what we do is button on click is having a function that returns this dot handle click. That's it. So one, by binding in the constructor. Second, by using a bind method in the handler. Third, without using any bind. Because bind is related to memory and return is also related to memory. That means without using bind, you can make it use the memory. If you can keep the memory alive, it can use that memory. That is the nature actually. This is one concept of how we can use the event, right? Now, what about event arguments? Event arguments all are same. There is no change. What is the event argument? So here, so class component event arguments are same as in function component. Function component, how you use the event arguments in the same way. I told you default event arguments, custom event arguments, everything is same. That means how do you access event related details or object related details? How you can use them is, we can use an event argument. So for example, class event arguments are same. So the event arguments are same. So that means you see the event arguments. So for example, this button is having an ID as btn insert. So it is having a value like insert, something like this. And you want to access them. Then what you do here, you need to just define E as an event argument. And how to log them? Console.log, I am using here target dot id. So in the next line, we are having target dot what? Value, well, not value. It is having a value, na? Yeah, value. And how about event arguments e dot client X, client Y? All these are same. There is no change in this. That means all event arguments are accessed in the same way. So I am accessing these event arguments, and here in the console, I click on insert, and all those are same. That means the ID, name, and X position, all these are same. There is no change in event arguments. Event arguments are same. Only the concept is how do you write the event and how do you handle the event, especially when you are dealing with state, right? Event arguments are same. So handle click will have E, and E dot client X. So E dot key code like that, and E dot target dot ID, E dot target dot class name. All these are same. And synthetic, all synthetic events are same. All synthetic events are same. That means keyboard events, we have button events, so we have state events, element state events, touch events, all are same. Touch events, everything same. Everything same. So all those events are same. There is no change in that. So that is synthetic events. And no need to explain them. Whatever you learned in the function, you can use in the same way. Okay, so data binding and event binding. Then how do you handle two-way binding? Two-way binding is done by using what? Two-way binding is done by using events. How to collect the value e dot target dot value. You can store in a reference and you can use. All the concepts are same. There is no change in this now. Now, what about another concept is, so properties in class component. Actually, properties in function component. Properties in function component are defined as parameters. Na? Why you need properties? To design controlled components. Controlled components are defined by using properties. Na? Controlled components are designed by using properties, right? You control using properties. We control by using properties. So what we done in function component, you remember we designed nav bar grid systems like ready-made, that means custom components, controlled components. Here, if you want controlled components, how to design controlled components? Controlled components use properties. Parent component controls the child component by passing values into the properties. Class component have default, have, you can say, built-in properties. Class component have built-in properties. Object. Class component have built-in properties object. So you can use to configure properties. Class component have built-in properties. You can use to configure properties. class component have built-in properties. That means what does it means is actually suppose I want a controlled component here. Suppose some nav bar or something like I want. Then how do you design a controlled component? Actually, I will copy this example for the previous one. No? I will copy this example. Okay. Now here you see how to create a custom component. Just in class itself, I will give a new folder. This is suppose vertical nav bar. Vertical nav bar. Something like this we are giving. Some vertical nav bar. And I created vertical nav bar dot JSX. Okay. I am creating a class export function. Sorry, this is class name vertical nav bar. And it extends from React dot component. Okay. And it have a constructor which uses the super constructor. And here we are defining a render method which will return some markup. Okay, this is general option. Now what is the point is our intention is to use this in another component. This is a controlled component. Then what we do is we are creating a nav. Okay, in this nav we have an UL, unordered list, we have a list item, right? And what we will do is here we will keep here in the nav, here we will keep a div. Okay, for this div we class heading 5 or heading 4. And here we want a title for nav bar, means company name. And this will come from parent. Then how do you define? Actually in a function component we declare properties parameter and we use properties. Here this dot directly props is there. Earlier what we done, we created props parameter manually for function components. Class inbuilt have properties. Class inbuilt have state. Class inbuilt have properties, and in that property it is an object type. What is the property name? Title. It is an object type, then it is title. Okay, what about here? What about here is we want to generate this dot what? Props dot we are expecting items dot map. Then we will read every item, and for every item we will create a list item. In the list item we will display that item and it will have a key will be item. And here suppose I am giving this nav bar is having a style width as suppose 200 pixel. Okay, now it is having okay, that's fine. And it is having class border and border 2 and border dark, like this we are having. And what should happen here? Unordered list, class as list unstyled, and every list item will have a class. So class as bg dark, so text white, adding to margin y some 3, like this. Every list item is defined with some option, and we are having some rounded. Okay, these are all the options you configured this. This is nothing but we are just creating a nav bar, and in that 2 properties are there. Okay, now I want to use this vertical nav bar here. I want to use that vertical nav bar here. So what I need to do? I need to import. So I need to import what? Vertical nav bar. Now this vertical nav bar is controlled with properties. What are the properties we are expecting? Title. Title is some shopper. That is, title is a string. And what you are expecting? Items. Items is a menu. It is an array. It is an array. Into that array, we are passing home, so shop, so pages, some blog. So like this, we are adding some options into this. That means now a vertical bar will come and it will create like this. And for this nav bar, what I will do, just where is it? Yeah, for this nav bar, we are giving as padding 4, right? And here we are giving width as 150, enough like this. Then it is going to display like this. That is the nav bar. This time it is having the properties coming from this place. That means what we are doing, we are creating a controlled component. But what is the point about controlled component? Controlled component, the properties are inbuilt. That means every class component have properties. We just use them. And the properties is what type? Object type. So you can access the properties by using what you can do, by using this dot props. By using this dot props. It is an object type with key value collection. It is an object type with key value collection. That means what you can do, this dot key. We can just define like this. And in any component, what we do, we access the key and we apply some value into this. We access the key and we send some value into this. That's how generally we do. So here also we have controlled components and uncontrolled components. And the controlled components we configure by using properties, and properties are inbuilt. We have to just use those properties. In function components, we have to configure the properties manually. We send them as parameters and you use them, right? That is the concept. Example is this one. I will copy this example. This is vertical navbar dot JSX. Vertical navbar dot JSX. And this is some register user dot JSX. In that we are using that navbar. This is the example of both of the concepts you have seen, right? Now next important, that means now you are understanding the old and new concepts both. That means you can handle old versions, new versions, how they manage. Now another concept is how we can use forms and validations. If we know, then we can finish the class concept, class components. Then we will go into important routing. Routing is very important for designing single page application, right? That we'll see in next session, right? Tomorrow we'll do that. Tomorrow we will understand how to use forms in class component. Then we will see routing. That is major for designing single page applications. We will continue. Okay, right.